Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Peedy. I am with Publishing Professionals Network. We are a nonprofit, all volunteer, and we work to improve the lives of people in publishing. And one of the aspects of that is education and professional development. We love these sort of noon Zooms, as we've started calling them, where there's just sort of a quick dip into areas that we think are going to be helpful. And I think today's session on social media is it's one that we have wanted to do for a really long time, and we're really fortunate to have Ariana Adams with us today to do it. So finally, we're cracking this one. The other way that we do that educational work is we have a conference, an annual conference, and this coming year, April 24th, Friday, here in Berkeley, California, at the David Brower Center. It looks like it's going to be a really good one. We're in the final stages of sort of formalizing exactly what we're going to cover in it, and we've got a great keynote speaker, et cetera, to be announced. If you're not on our mailing list, I highly recommend that you do that. There's a way you can join the mailing list from our website, and some of our board members are here, and they'll put that in the chat. The other thing is to become a member of PPN. It's if you're an individual as opposed to like a big company, it's very reasonable, $25 a year. And if that's too much of a stretch for you, please contact us. We don't want there to be any barriers for people to become members. So, today's session, we're sort of aiming for about an hour and leaving the last 15, 20 minutes for Q&A. Hold off on your Q&A. We'll put them in the chat, but wait until the end so that we don't have to kind of scroll back to the very beginning. But go ahead and do put your say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're zooming in from. We're always interested in that, and also we're always interested in how did you hear about us, and specifically this Zoom session. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Susie Chavez, who is on our board, our VP, our fearless leader, and she's going to be in conversation today. Take it away, Susie.
Thank you, Dave. It is a pleasure to see everyone here today, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Ariana Adams, who is joining us all the way from the East Coast. Ariana Adams holds a BA in English with a concentration in writing and publication from the University of North Georgia, and is currently pursuing an MBA at the University of Georgia with a focus in marketing and entrepreneurship. Over the past 5 years, she has served as an editor and assistant managing editor at the University of North Georgia Press, where she has led initiatives in marketing strategy, acquisitions, and professional development through the press's internship program. Combining her editorial expertise with a strong foundation in business and digital marketing, Ariana brings a unique perspective on how publishers can effectively navigate and leverage social media to amplify their reach and impact. And that's what she's going to be doing with us here today. The way this is going to go is we're just going to kind of keep it very informal, talk between the two of us, going over some of the things that Ariana has done in the past and that she has found are useful or worth learning about in the social media space. And so with that, Ariana, I would love if we could start with you describing a little bit about what your role was at North Georgia and what those job duties looked like.
Absolutely. So, hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here today and share a little bit about my experience in the social media space, specifically for book publishing and book marketing. So, my personal experience and sort of how I found my way into this is a little bit of a rabbit trail story, similar to, I think, most of us who find our way into the creative environment. I started off um, actually being really focused in the sciences, and that's where I thought that I was going to be. I was doing things related to chemistry, actually, and eventually realized that that was not quite the path for me. Some of the math took me out. And so I wound up switching over to the publishing space and found my way into an internship that eventually found morphed its way into a position at the University of North Georgia Press, here where I'm based in Georgia. And at first, the majority of what I was doing was actually editorial work. I started out as an editorial assistant doing proofreading and some low-level copy editing work, that eventually, over time, also transformed into doing acquisitions editing work, and then sort of moving from there as well. It transitioned into taking over marketing duties as I sort of gained experience over time. So it all sort of morphed. Our team was relatively small, so everyone was doing quite a few different duties at once. So I oversaw our marketing efforts, and that included social media under that particular umbrella. And I was able to do a couple of different things to sort of shift our strategy around, and see some encouraging growth over about the 2.5 years that I oversaw our marketing and our social media marketing, in general. So that's kind of how I found my way into that particular space on top of doing other publishing editorial duties. But that's a little bit kind of a nutshell of my background and how I found my way into some of this.
Thank you, Ariana. Can you talk a little bit more about what you were saying about how working in a small press forced you to find your footing pretty quickly in the social media management space?
Absolutely. So for our press at the time, we were a full-time staff of three, and then we would have interns who would rotate in and out with the university semesters. So about every 4 months, we would have two new interns who would come in, or a max of two who would come in every 4 months to have an internship experience with us. So because we all had a lot of different duties, and there was a happy, but there was some churn going on with our interns because of the pacing, and the timing of that. It really did mean that we had to be very agile and we had to move very quickly. So stepping into my role with marketing personally, I was very thankful that I felt like I was able to have essentially an opportunity to wade into a couple of different responsibilities over time, starting off in editorial and mostly focusing on that, with maybe doing some low-level support work for our social media manager and marketing manager at the time. And then eventually being able to move up and progress, and step into a couple of other opportunities and responsibilities related to our marketing efforts, both with things just like, planning events and networking with our authors and figuring out what their capabilities were, helping to figure out how we were going to incorporate them into our marketing strategies for book launches and releases, and then eventually taking over the social media component. So on the one hand, it was gradual. On the other hand, it was also kind of fast because while there was a little bit of a background to, or former experiences to fall back on, at the same time, offering support is very different from overseeing that particular operation. So there was a little bit of a steep learning curve. For me in particular, it meant doing a lot of research, attending different events like this and learning from others who are and were, more experienced in the marketing space. Um, and really, I mean, I think this is probably going to bleed into other questions and areas where this conversation will go, but also really, and kind of simply maybe, not being afraid to try different things. getting the research component, getting the data, understanding our press's branding and messaging and what it was that we were trying to get out. Because if we're talking about social media specifically, it's very public facing. And so your social media presence is essentially, for many different people, going to be the first experience that they have with your firm, your company, your brand. So seeing a social media account, let's take an Instagram account as an example, essentially as a piece of real estate. It's online real estate, and you're able to build whatever you want on it. That's
Mhm.
an amazing opportunity, but that can also maybe feel a little bit overwhelming sometimes. But based on whatever it is that we're able to build and however we're able to show up consistently in a way that works for us, that feels genuine, like we're not just blindly churning out content that isn't maybe necessarily data-based, or it's not quite resonating with our audiences. It's just something to have out. You know, that can get us some results, but they're going to be pretty limited. So understanding really all of these different things that we're about to talk about choosing which platforms are going to work for us, understanding who our audiences are and our audience segments are and what they're looking for on different platforms. Um, all of those things are just incredibly important so that we're able to show up well and be that really great first impression that allows us to stand apart to consumers. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but there are a lot of moving parts and there are a lot of different components. And I mean, truly, social media it's such a fluid space. Things are changing every minute. So being able to find different ways to kind of discern the patterns and some of the different ways that people are responding and showing up on different platforms is really going to help us to be able to leverage what are really amazing, powerful, free tools for us in the marketing space.
It sounds like you really had the opportunity to kind of start from scratch in this space and build up your knowledge from the ground up. Can you expand a little bit more on what you were saying earlier in regards to deciding what platforms to use and what your strategies were going to look like as someone new in this space, kind of trying to build on your predecessor's work?
Of course. So when I came in, the main platforms that we were using at the time were Instagram, Facebook, and at the time, Twitter. Um, from that particular space, what I noticed when running essentially an audit of our social media accounts, which is something I really encourage everyone to do, is go to their main accounts that they're using for their marketing and just run a really objective audit of your content and kind of parse out what your patterns are and look at it from a viewer side, an audience member side, and go, okay, if I didn't know anything about this particular firm, what is it that would resonate most with me? What is it that would catch my eye and make me curious? Um, make note of those things, and then also make note of things that just you as a viewer would maybe just pass right over and not even see. Because if we're talking about these platforms, I mean, the average, I'm fairly certain, it may be shorter now, but at least it used to be the average amount of time that somebody spent just kind of casually scrolling through their main feed on something like Instagram, looking at just pictures. It's about 3 seconds. We're not even getting to the caption. So going and running a very objective audit on your particular account and what really resonates and what really works for you as an audience member is going to be something that can really also give you some insight into the strengths that you already have and that you're already presenting and will give you an opportunity to double down on those particular efforts. So that was one of the very first things that I did, was run an audit on our account, see what some of the patterns were, some of the things that people were engaging with well and that were resonating with them, and then some of the things that essentially were like, I mean, okay, this is something that sort of keeps us in mind for people, but if they even see it, and are they? So from that, I was able to really kind of gain some insights into, okay, I can kind of see what our audience is wanting now. And I can see how our social media strategy and kind of content pillars maybe need to change. We might need to shift them. And that's something else. Um, it's kind of talked about a lot. It's a bit of a buzz term, I suppose. But I mean, truly having content pillars that hold up your social media strategy is incredibly important. And for our press and the audit that I was running across our accounts, the patterns that I noticed really sort of showed that the three main pillars that our entire strategy needed to rest on, and this is for us, but were education, entertainment, and promotion. The really great thing about those three particular pillars were that you can have content that's very flexible and moves across those pillars. It can hit all three at once, it can hit two, it can just be specific with one. It's very easy to make a promotional post that's also educational, especially if we're talking about a scholarly or an academic press. We can also do something that is behind the scenes content that is educational and kind of showing what the publishing process is like or what the acquisitions process is like. That's educational. We can also make it a little bit entertaining for people so that it feels accessible to them and it resonates, it feels relevant. So those three pillars were extraordinarily helpful and really helped in order to build out what our plans were going to look like week to week, month to month, year to year. So at the beginning and doing some of that starting from scratch, those were the different steps that I took in order to figure out, okay, how are we going to continue to evolve, continue to move forward, and really highlight the value that we're bringing to people.
Is that something that you'd say you generally looked at as a whole for the press, or something that you did like season to season or even book to book?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the time starting out, it was a very macro view. So it was more in terms of what do we already have as a press in terms of our strengths? What is the value that we have that we know we have that maybe isn't quite getting communicated to people as effectively as it could be? How do we do that? And what are people looking for in terms of, how are we even going to get eyes on this content? Because we can put out in a graphic a
Mhm.
block of text about all of the values that we have, but people are going to see that and be like, that's too much, and nobody's really gonna sit there and go through it unless you're really passionate about it, which is amazing. But the majority of people are going to see that and be like, whoa, I don't even know, and keep moving. So even just going through and running those audits and seeing on the back end the analytics as well at the time, who are who are our age brackets across different platforms? And based on that, what is going to resonate with them more? If we're talking about an age bracket that's maybe like 55 to 65, that we might see on for us, we might see that kind of a bracket on Facebook, although we also had about a 45 to 55 age bracket that was pretty strong on Instagram as well. Are they looking for longer form content? Are they looking for something that does feel maybe a little bit more research driven and more purely educational? Maybe some of the entertainment pieces that we might be using for different audiences might not resonate in the same way, and it might not work quite as well. So what are some other things that we can do in order to really reach the audiences who are coming for our content, in a way that's really going to work for them. So understanding what was going on there was really helpful too. So also making sure when you're running your audits that you're looking at your analytics and seeing some of that as well, so that you're making informed decisions based on the audience that you have, but also based on, everyone's individual goals for their social media presence and what those might look like. Um, Going, okay, these may be our audiences right now, but does that actually match what we're putting out? We may have an age bracket that is older, but maybe we need to be skewing a little bit younger based on some of the things that we have coming out in the upcoming season, as an example. Or maybe we have a younger age bracket, but maybe we want to skew a little bit older because what we have coming out is going to resonate more with a different audience. So making sure that we're making informed decisions and seeing, okay, so we've got strengths in these particular areas on these platforms. We can very easily push content that's going to resonate with them here. Oh, but I see over here, we've got something else going on. We've got other book releases, other products, other services coming out that we can push for this particular audience that's going to resonate over here as well. So making sure that we're looking at our analytics, that we're doing really honest audits of the content that we have, that we can articulate to ourselves what our strengths and weaknesses are to our own teams. That is massively important. If you are in marketing, being able to adequately communicate to your other teams, this is the value that we have as an organization that we are putting out in terms of messaging on our platforms using these particular tools, these particular strategies is so important and clarifying, not just for the rest of the organization, but for ourselves too. It helps sometimes to be able to say it, because so often when we're doing social media marketing, if we're being honest about it, a lot of times we have social media marketers who have a lot of other job responsibilities as well. So we are running with a lot of different things at once. And sometimes we know that we're making data-driven decisions. We know that we're making decisions that are reflecting our particular organization's brand. And we're making decisions and experimenting with things in order to relate and resonate more and be more relevant with particular audiences related to the products and services that we're putting out. But because we're running with all these other things as well, sometimes we don't always have the opportunity to slow down and even put it down on paper for ourselves what we're doing. So having a moment where we can hit pause, even if it's just for a couple minutes. I don't mean like stop and take a week to do this. You don't have to plan. That could be really helpful. But even just like stop and take a couple of minutes one day and go through, what does our Facebook presence look like? If I were a viewer and I came across this through my algorithm and I were just scrolling here for 5, 10, 15 minutes, just kind of exploring, a little curious, what would resonate with me? What wouldn't? Quick audit, glance at the analytics and go, okay, I can see where some of this relates and where some of it doesn't. I can see where some of the strengths are. I can see where some of the areas we might need to improve could be.
Yep.
Quick 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be crazy. Can be really helpful.
And we get a little bit deeper into that space, into that data-driven space. I think everyone on the call would love to know a little bit more about whether you've seen any specific trends as a university press, in terms of what platforms work best for which kinds of books, or if you happened to do one of these little data-driven audits and found that one specific book in your tenure at UNG was a good example of what you've been talking about here.
Absolutely. So for us, one of the things that I noticed is on Instagram. So, just to give a little bit of an idea in terms of catalog. So, the University of North Georgia Press does some trade fiction, and it also does monographs, and it does military nonfiction as well. Those are sort of the three main areas that are in the catalog. So, the University of North Georgia Press has this really great partnership with the Association of the U.S. Army and their book program. And so they are partners, and a lot of the military titles that come out, also based on the University of North Georgia's history as a military college from its origins, kind of stem from that space. So if we were talking about our military titles as an example, we would see a lot of really great engagement for them actually on Instagram. We would see some strong engagement on Facebook as well, mostly because there are a decent number of Facebook groups that are specifically geared towards veterans, towards active military members, who really strongly resonated with our content and who had really strong just online communities. And that was great, being able to say, okay, we know where they are online, we know where they're finding community online, and we can go into those spaces and pretty adequately be able to, and quickly be able to convey our value to them in a way that would resonate really quickly and easily. On Instagram, there are also really strong military communities as well. A lot of them are more sort of centered around maybe certain influencers. We had one particular author who was just really, really great in terms of social media and his presence. He was very active, and he did a lot of expat traveling, as an example. And so he posted about that a lot, and how for veterans, maybe living in that kind of an environment could be particularly beneficial to them. And so his book really fed into what he was already doing online, and he was able to incorporate that content really well, and build up this really strong following that we were able to partner with in terms of launching his book effectively. So that's one example. Another, so the University of North Georgia Press also focuses on specifically Southern fiction in terms of trade as well. And so we had a couple of short story collections that came out. The most recent one, short story collection, is called The Aliens Will Come to Georgia First. That's a very fun collection, and we're still very happy with that title. But that particular book really resonated with our younger audiences, whether that was college, university students, or moving into more of sort of the millennial generation, ages sort of like 28 to about 42, something like that. So that particular title, for many reasons, was very sort of eye-catching on Instagram, and we got some very strong engagement with it there. We were shifting into LinkedIn specifically, and putting out monograph and more purely research-driven titles on LinkedIn, and that was going really well also, in terms of what we were able to do with those titles as they related to things like professional development. So also Facebook as well was great for anything nonfiction, monograph, data-driven, and something maybe a little bit more long form about a book was going to do better on Facebook in comparison to something like X or Instagram or some of the other platforms. So as a little taste, that was sort of how we were able to figure out where the market segments were and how we could cater to what it was that they were looking for.
Thank you. I feel like we've done a lot of talking about what we're doing in terms of relation to our audience as presses through social media. But we haven't really had the opportunity to touch on how that interaction looks when you're working with authors. Could you tell us a little bit about the advice that you give to authors in this space and how you collaborate with them in terms of social media marketing for their books?
Of course, yes, that's so important. So with authors, it's always important to sort of figure out, okay, exactly how comfortable are you with social media? Is that something that you even want to do? Because it's not even really, it's a bit of a hot take for some people, but it's not even fully necessary for you to be a social media influencer to be an author. You'll see some different things where people will say that maybe you need to do that. You've got to have your own, super engaged, strong, massive community across these different platforms in order to be a successful author. But frankly, that's just not true. And so, as a press, it's really important to understand where our authors' comfort zones are, where their capabilities lie, and partner with them in a way that is going to respect their wishes while also meeting, our sales and our marketing goals at the same time. So having an honest conversation with them in some form or fashion is really important with that. If they're open to it, they're maybe not experts, quote unquote, in social media, but they're open to building more of an audience or creating um, more of a platform for their work. Um, being able, open and willing to consult with them in terms of a couple of different strategies that they can use in order to build that can be really great and can really help in terms of even the campaigns that we're putting out with their book releases. An author who's open to building their social media presence may be a little bit more open to doing something like an Instagram takeover or an Instagram live, a Facebook live event, doing something like a webinar that you're able to put a recording out on LinkedIn or different things like that. Or even doing different things like podcast episodes. That was something else that we had developed was we were doing our own in-house podcast about our books in the publishing industry. And so if we have authors who are open to it, that's another avenue. They may feel a little bit uncomfortable with social media, or they may not be particularly interested in creating, this particular influencer-esque persona across platforms. But if they're open to doing a podcast episode with us, we can take some sound bites and we can put that out across our platforms, and they're still out there and we're still getting what we need without harming anybody's sensibilities. So being flexible with our strategies as well. And just really, I mean, it all kind of ties back to having those open and honest conversations with them that go, okay, where are you comfortable? Here are some of the different tools that we have. Here are some of the different things that we can do with them and the opportunities that we can create. Because of course, with publicity, with marketing, with these different things, we do everything we can, but we're creating opportunities. We're putting out messaging about value to the people who we think it's going to resonate with most and who are eventually going to convert. But if we're talking about kind of that typical traditional marketing sort of structure of funnels, marketing and sales funnels, these days there are all sorts of different convoluted ways that people find their way into our funnels. And so because of that, we've got to be cognizant of exactly what it is that we're doing with our content and where, and just being very conscientious about that. It can get a little bit overwhelming, and this is something that I want to make sure that I say before I came on. I was like, I gotta remember this. There's a lot about these days, and just in the more macro marketing industry and space, about omni-channel marketing. I hear it all the time. And it's true, we've got so many different ways to market to people, whether we're talking paid or organic. There are just so many different ways. And people find their way into our different avenues related to that from all over the place. But it can feel really overwhelming, especially if you're coming from maybe a smaller firm like ours. You don't always have the manpower to be everywhere at once. And you can try, but as you try, something that you may notice is it's hard to maintain a certain level of quality over time in all of those different facets. So again, in the same way that for authors, It's not actually necessary for you to be a social media influencer in order to have a successful book for a publisher, for a press. It is not necessary for you to be on every single channel all at once. Pick a couple that work for what it is that you have for your resources and your capabilities. Reasonable decisions, strategic, but reasonable. Pick a couple that are gonna you're most comfortable with, most confident in. You've got some good data in there already. You've got a decent presence in there already. Hone in on those, focus on those. It's gotta be quality over quantity. At least personally, that is the camp that I come from. Quality over quantity is really important because when we're doing things like batching out content in order to just have volume across a lot of different platforms, a lot of different outlets, it can start to feel very inauthentic. It can start to feel very impersonal. And we can begin to miss some very major audience segments without even realizing it because putting out the content becomes just checking a box. And it's not about, okay, who is where and how do I resonate with them best? How do I communicate value with them best? Instead, it's just, well, I have to be everywhere. There's this pressure to be everywhere. And that's how we get everyone into our funnels and all of these different things. Yes and no, really, at the end of the day. So, because you may have people who dip in a little bit, they may get an impression of you. They may become aware of your particular organization or firm, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they had the best impression. It doesn't necessarily mean that based on what they've seen, they're going to move further down the funnel. So, being aware of your particular organization's strengths and capabilities in a very honest way and going, okay, right now with where we are, we're going to focus on 2 platforms. We're going to focus on 1 platform, and we're just going to make that really strong. And we're going to build out our audience there. We're going to learn from the data that we get there. And as we grow, we'll maybe move into this other platform. And we're going to do that in a way that is mindful, that is genuine, and that is cognizant of what we have going on, what our constraints and capabilities are. It's okay to grow in stages. I think a lot of times in marketing and with social media, there is this pressure almost to, well, if I'm going to be on there, it's got to be at least a couple of different platforms. Pick the ones that are going to work best for what you have going on, what your organization has going on. If our goal and what we are prioritizing is presenting our products and our services at a certain level of quality, and that's going to be different for everybody. But if it's to present our products and services, our brand at a certain level of quality, doing that in a mindful way is more important than volume. So taking some time is okay. I'm working very hard to try and take pressure off of people. That's the main thing that I really want to convey is it's okay to focus on quality on just 1 or 2 different platforms. And that's also going to look different for everybody too. So as an example, some presses put out books that are very conversation based. They're incredibly timely. They've got so many different areas in them that have so much opportunity for conversation because they're pushing conversations forward. They're innovative. They're wonderful. And for a book like that, maybe going somewhere a little bit more discussion based, like back in the old days, Twitter. You live in conversation on Twitter. And so being able to go to a platform where you can put out a couple of hot takes and start getting feedback from people about it and starting conversations around those books, building a little bit of buzz, having a little bit of a trending topic with that particular book could be really great for it. It may not live as well on something like a Facebook. You may still get decent engagement there, but maybe making that particular book live in a space that's more conversation driven is going to be a way to get it the type of visibility that it needs kind of pre-launch and then during its front list period. So understanding the strengths and the weaknesses across platforms as well is great. And understanding where our lists are. Do we have more books that are a little bit more conversation based and driven? Is that what they're doing? Are they pushing conversations forward in a particular way that is very kind of timely with what we have going on? And we know that people are going to have things to say if we put out a quote about from this particular title, or if we have a little snippet of the author speaking about their book. Places like LinkedIn are great for that too. LinkedIn can also be very conversation based and driven as well. So there are different spaces for things like that. But so figuring out, okay, based on our list, which platforms are going to complement us best? Because those are naturally where our strengths already are. We don't want to be fighting against the platforms that we're using. We want them to work with us. So figuring out some of that, doing honest audits with our accounts, but also honest audits of our lists, our catalogs, is also going to help us go, okay, which platforms are going to work most harmoniously with what we already have? Because we don't, I mean, genuinely, I know it's another kind of hot topic, but I mean, we might not want to be on TikTok. Like our books might not work best there, you know? They might work best somewhere else. They might work best on even, and this is one that I find so fascinating, but they might work best on Pinterest. We don't talk about that a lot with social media marketing, but it might work best on something like Pinterest. It might work best on something like Blue Sky. It might work best on an Instagram or a Facebook. So being honest about it, and instead of, because again, there's a pressure for this too. So in trying to take off the pressure, when certain social media platforms become very large and trendy, there can be this pressure of, I've got to be there. That's where everyone is. Facebook is still the leading social media platform in terms of users. For number of users, it's Facebook. In the United States, so that's global. In the United States, one of the top ones is also YouTube. And again, that might not work for you and what you've got going on, but it's important to be cognizant of some of these different trends and go, yeah, okay, you know, TikTok, it's got some really explosive growth and there can be some great opportunities there based on what you have with your list and some of the different communities that are on TikTok. That might be perfect for you. If it's not, though, that's okay, because there are all of these other platforms where we've got billions of users who are over there who might be a more receptive audience to your book and your work. We don't want to be fighting against the platforms. So it's okay to see the trendy ones and go, oh, that's interesting. We might explore a little bit, but there doesn't have to be pressure to chase the trends in those particular ways.
Thank you. Okay, I know we're coming up on the end of our time, and I want to make sure that there is the opportunity for a little bit of Q&A. So I think I'm just going to ask this one kind of compound question and leave us at that. We've talked about a lot of different things in this session. If you had to summarize it down to a handful of like the most important do's and don'ts, what would they be? And then can you tell us a little bit about what you think social media, based on those do's and don'ts or the things that you've talked about here, is going to look in the next few years?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep my answer short because I get excited and I talk long. But I would say probably the do's are, do be honest about your organization's natural constraints. You don't have to force it. Do be honest about where you're at, and do give yourself permission to grow at the pace that is going to be most sustainable for your organization. Um, do look into your analytics. Don't be afraid of them. The analytics can be really great because they show us who is already looking at our content. Um, and they're also great because they can really sort of begin to reveal the strengths and weaknesses that are kind of manifesting themselves across our content on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. They help to reveal patterns in where people are, even just in spikes of when are people even just showing up on these platforms on a certain day. Also very important and very underrated in terms of advice. So I'll just throw this in. Um, that's a big one in terms of analytics, and that's usually a pretty simple one. Like you don't necessarily have to have a paid platform that you're using, whether that's Hootsuite or I think Sprout Social is like they have a paid option as well, or these different ones. They're great, but you can already get this data for free on the back end of your business accounts for the majority of your social media. When are people just online? When are they looking at your content? What days and what times? And it may not make sense a lot of times. It may be kind of odd. Um, you may have the most views of your content on, I don't know, like a Tuesday at 8 p.m. I don't know why that happens, but sometimes it does. And being willing and able to schedule your content out, though, around those times will do very interesting things to your engagement. So I highly recommend at least running, if that's not what we're doing already, run a little experiment for, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, something, see what that does to your engagement. Um, really kind of intentionally targeting those times where people are really spiking and viewing your content and posting specifically around those times. Um, I highly recommend, because the time periods can be weird, schedule out the posts so you're not manually doing them at strange times of day and night. But that can be a really fascinating experiment that can yield some really interesting results. So, yes, wanted to make sure that I talked about that too. Um, don't be afraid of social media. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. Um, do be open and curious, and willing to experiment and willing to fail. It's okay to fail. Oh my goodness. We did one thing. I ran an experiment one time. We did a Facebook Live event and with an author for their book launch. And from that experience, I learned my lesson. I do not recommend Facebook Live. We came across a lot of different issues on the back end with sort of their user experience and different things. And it was rough getting that thing up and going. So we learned from that experience a couple of different things. We learned that people are interested in live events on social media, especially with authors. They love to feel like they're able to engage with an author. They love to feel like an author is accessible and like they're getting kind of exclusive behind the scenes content. And we also learned that Facebook was not the platform for us to do that on. So, it's okay. It's okay to fail. It's okay to have moments that are a little bit rough. Um, but just experiment, because a lot of times we can learn a decent amount from, doing research on these different things, but a lot of it really does come down to practice and figuring out what's going to resonate most with our audiences, because we can only be so precise if we're not speaking about a particular firm and its strengths and weaknesses. So, um, being okay with experimenting, being okay with failing, that's hard. That's hard. But being okay with it every once in a while, can that in and of itself can just yield some really valuable lessons and results that just bring us back so much stronger. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Okay. I think this is a great time for us to open up to questions. Let's take a look at the chat. If anybody has questions that they would like to pose, please feel free to put them in here now or to um, raise your hand and we should be able to see you that way as well. Okay. I'm seeing one regarding voice, in terms of how you recommend adjusting your voice for different accounts and making sure that it's personal instead of um, overly professional.
Yes, I love that question, Dave. Um, so in terms of voice across platforms, a lot of it is going to come down to what type of framework you would like to use for your particular brand. One of the things that I always encouraged and just sort of helped in terms of a framework that kept things flexible enough that you could be creative, but still created enough structure that you could easily sort of organize your thoughts around it, was this idea of hook, value, call to action. Typically, if we're talking about captions or different things like that, that was usually what I would say to our interns. We had incorporated them into our social media planning as well. And whenever I was teaching them how to approach social media from the perspective of representing another organization, that's always what I would tell them is you're writing a micro story, essentially. And that was a bit of a leap for them because many of them were coming from our English program where they're going much more long form than, just a couple of words. But if we can think about captions as a micro story and we can think about them from the perspective of, okay, how are we going to pull people in? How are we going to convey our value and our story in a relatively succinct way that is going to resonate with this particular audience for this particular book based on the research we've already done for it? We know who this person is. We've got a profile, you know, we've got all of those things. So what do we pull out of that profile and put in the actual story, quote unquote, content of the caption that's going to resonate most with them? Whether that's something that is, yes, maybe a little bit more confrontational. Maybe we need to do that. Um, or it's something that is going to be maybe a little bit more academic, but it's very much geared towards almost like a trade crossover.
Mhm.
Um, Based on what we know about the book, its strengths, its value, and the audience and what they're looking for. What story are we telling in those couple of words in the middle? And then what's our call to action to see if we can get them to convert? And sometimes that's has to do with engagement and comments. Sometimes that has to do with, and this is one that some people, it's the bane of their existence, but we still need it. So, if we're talking about links and bios and different things like that, if we're trying to get them to click on links because we're doing a sale, um, various things, tying it in so that people can see the value. And then there's an additional invitation to them. If they want to learn more, where do they go? If they want to engage with this material more, what do they do? If they have questions, if they want to reach out, what does that look like for them? And it's going to vary across the post, but being able to do that is really helpful. So that's the framework that we were using that would help so that it's personalized, quote unquote, across the platforms and for the audiences and the books. But it also helped it maybe move a little bit more efficiently because we had something, a little bit of a formula that we could follow while still allowing for creativity and personalization.
Awesome. I'm seeing a couple of questions here regarding like paid advertising or influencer collaborations. Where would you say that all sits in this space and whether it's, necessary or helpful in certain kinds of books versus others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say in full transparency, um, we didn't use influencers. So I don't necessarily want to speak on something that we did not do. Um, I will say with influencers, of course, with vetting them, it's very important to make sure that we're not just Googling people and then we're going, oh, this person has a large following and I'm just going to reach out to them and have them do the book. Like we need to make sure that we're digging into their content and figuring out in terms of optics for us, what is this going to mean? Do they have a pattern of reviewing certain types of books, but all of the reviews are negative? Do they have a pattern of reviewing certain types of books that maybe don't actually align with our branding and our messaging? Do we want to be associated with what it is that their particular branding and what it is that they're doing? And if the answer is no, that's fine. But we have to make sure that we're digging into their content and we're also protecting our organization and maybe digging a little bit further back into their timelines because as we know with the internet, nothing goes away. So being able to go in and see, is there anything in here from this particular influencer that might come back to haunt us later, even if it wasn't, didn't have anything to do with us at the time, but now we're associated with them and what do we do? So be very thorough in investigating and vetting your influencers. Um, Truthfully, I believe that like interviewing them, having a conversation with them is a good idea. Um, DMs are fine, but sometimes being able to speak with them, even if it's in a situation like this, is going to give you a better idea of what their tone is, what their content is going to look like, what they value, and whether or not they're going to be um, harmonious with your products and services. So those particular things off the top of my head, I would say are incredibly important just for protecting yourself and your organization. But in full transparency, we weren't using influencers at the time. So I don't necessarily want to give too much advice on something that we didn't do.
Okay. Thank you. I see a question in here about the industry a little bit more fully. But to make sure we keep it, in the vein, I will tweak it just a little bit and ask, is there anything that you have found in your time at North Georgia, especially in social media, that you learned or wish you had known that would have made you a better candidate to take on a role like yours? Anything that you think people would be able to really hone their skills on or highlight to be prime candidates for joining the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of being a strong candidate for an interview, um, it's very important to be able, if we're talking specifically about social media marketing and applying for that particular type of role, um, being able to articulate why social media marketing is important and what it is that you're actually doing. Those things are huge because it is such a fluid space and it is all moving so fast. And honestly, even with influencers, it can feel like you see people rise and fall at the blink of an eye and you don't even really understand what's going on. It can feel a bit overwhelming and a bit chaotic at times. So being able to articulate, if I am applying for a role as a social media manager, I understand, and my potential future employer understands that I am doing 4 jobs in one. And those 4 jobs are actually managing the account. So that is scheduling, posting, and doing project management to make sure that everything is moving at the pace it's supposed to be moving. We are staying coordinated with the rest of the marketing department, and things are going out in a timely manner and it's efficient. We're also doing the strategy, the actual social media strategy itself. We're putting together the content pillars and marrying the branding and the mission and the vision to what we're doing on social media and what the content is going to look like. From, the visual side of things, the design side, and the mode Are we doing more videos, reels, things like that? Or are we doing more kind of static post slideshows, things of that nature? Of what? All of these different things we're putting together, the strategy, building out the plans and the campaigns. We're creating the content, which would be its own full-time job by itself, just filming, editing, putting together some of these different things. Doing if you're depending on, exactly uh, how into it you're getting, color grading and all of these different things. And then we're also managing and moderating the online community too. So that means, are we keeping anyone who might harass in check? How are we managing filters for things like that? How are we answering just regular comments as well? And how are we being engaging on that side? How quickly are we responding to comments so that we're seen, as accessible as we want to be seen, some of these different things. So those are 4 different positions. And based on the size, some of those are going to be a little bit easier to lump together than others. Moderating a community might not take, that might not be a full-time job. But understanding I'm doing these 4 different jobs. And also in that, what I am doing, if I'm managing social media correctly, is I'm demonstrating how these campaigns tie back to our business goals. I'm able to communicate that well to management. How is what I'm doing tying into our business goals, our sales goals, our different targets? How can I quantify the cost savings with doing this organic marketing versus paid? What's the difference? Are we getting a good return on investment just in terms of time and resources that you're investing with a social media manager? Incredibly important. And then we also want to talk about contextualizing the social data that we're getting from this as well. A great example, this is more kind of marketing data, but we were talking about LinkedIn a little earlier, so it's still in the back of my brain. One of the things that some of the larger publishers do, I mean, you'll see it all the time on LinkedIn as an example with Penguin. They'll put out these polls fairly often about, oh, why do you like to read in the fall? What do you like to read? What are you doing while you're reading? Whatever. And that gives them incredibly valuable marketing data on, okay, we're hinting around at it, but for this particular genre of book, what is our market segment doing? Where are they when they're reading? Are they doing particular things at the same time? Are they reading with a particular mode? Are they mostly on something like an e-reader? Or are they doing physical books, and why? Because sometimes the questions will be that, which one do you prefer? So it gives them incredibly powerful market data, just from something as simple as throwing out a poll on LinkedIn. So, you know, being able to contextualize that kind of data and why it's important, while also being able to contextualize your analytics on the back end and what you're able to do with them to continue to meet your goals for social media, the business goals. How are you supporting the business as you go? Being able to adequately and effectively communicate those things in something like an interview is incredibly important. When you hear somebody talk about those different things, you go, okay, this is somebody who understands that, this is like we're within, this isn't just a hobby. And I'm not trying to make social media managers seem like that's what they're doing. They're not. But the misconception can be that, yeah, people are they're making silly reels or videos for Instagram and TikTok and things, and they're just posting them all day and how fun and whatever. But it's so much more than that. There's so much strategy that goes into it. There's so much research and data that goes into the decisions that are being made. So asking questions that will give a potential social media manager the opportunity to shine and answering those things, and acknowledge that, yes, it's very fast paced space, but at the same time, we are able to make informed decisions that allow us to meet our business goals is really important.
Well, thank you so very much for that answer. I hate to do this when there are still so many good questions in the chat, but we have hit our time. So I think, Dave, if you want to do this, I'm happy to let you, but thank you to Ariana for coming and taking the time to do this. And thanks to all of you for coming and participating in this Pro Dev event. We literally cannot do this without you. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, and we'll try to get this video up and running as on our YouTube channel as quickly as we can. I think this session just shows that there's so much more that we can explore around social media and publishing, and so we'll try to schedule more, and maybe we'll have Ariana back if she's willing to. We had an interesting discussion before the video started about LinkedIn and how it's its own thing and how to use it best. So. Thank you all for coming, and thank you especially to Ariana, and thank you, Susie, for doing such a great job having this conversation.